Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 170 today. And I am here with a very, very special guest. She's one of the best journalists out there, Eva Bartlett. How are you doing today, Eva?
I'm doing fine, thanks. I'm sorry, one of my dogs has erupted in barking, so I hope that's in the background more than what I hear.
Well, you know what? I think your dog is also saying hi too. Probably excited. Um,
Oh yes, she and her sister say hi to everybody around all the time. It's very
wow,
melodious.
that's very, very good. Eva, what type of dogs are they you have? You mind me saying?
I don't actually know. I adopted them when I moved to Russia, so they were 5 months old. Their litter was found in a field, and I was looking to adopt a dog, and I found it, I think, on Facebook of all places. I saw the photo of the one dog, and I reached out to the person, and she said, "Actually, there's two left. Will you take them?" And I said, "Yes." And so there's some sort of mixed breed, medium-sized dogs, but they're absolutely wonderful personalities.
No, what I can imagine that, well, you've done a really good job that. How would you say like Russia's like when it came to trying to rescue dogs in Russia compared to how they do it in America? Because I know in America and a lot in the West, they can be very rough with that stuff. You do get some good dog rescues in the West, but it really depends, doesn't it? It depends because you get a lot of local ones. Yeah. Hmm?
Well, you know what I appreciate? I mean, it's both sad, but I also appreciate. What's sad is there are a lot of street dogs in Russia. But the nice thing is you see a lot of people doing things to help them, whether it's putting out some bedding for the dogs or bringing hot food for the dogs in the winter. They're really going off. I'm sorry.
That's
So
okay. That's
I
okay.
like
Yeah.
that people treat dogs fairly well here, from what I've seen.
Yeah.
On the other hand, in urban environments, they tend to favor smaller dogs. So, what I consider a medium sized dog is bigger than what most people would want to have in their house. But in general, I think it's a good place for dogs. Guys, one
It's
second. I'm going to mute
all
my mic. One
It's
second.
all good. Yeah, it's all good. So yeah, folks, just to gonna improvise here. So yeah, dogs are very cute. They're adorable. I have type of favorite dog, which is yeah. By the way, Eva's back. Sorry, I was improvising, but yeah, Eva
Did
in
you want
Russia.
did you want me to throw a photo in of them? If I don't know if I can in here, can I?
It's okay. It's all good. We can just. But Eva, I was just gonna say, um, what type in Russia? What is the dog in Russia everyone loves? What type of dog in Russia does everyone love?
I think it depends on your environment and what you want the dog for. If you want it for companionship, again, people in urban settings prefer smaller dogs. Huskies are also popular, and German Shepherds. But other people like to have them for security, so you'd have a bigger variety of dog. So, but you can find pretty much anything here.
Yeah. Wow, that's pretty interesting. And how's the weather going in Russia at the moment for you? Is it going good there at the moment?
For me, good. Yeah, it was a cooler
Yeah.
summer than normal. I'm not a huge summer fan, so I like winter more. So
Well, you're
I'm in my
Canadian. You're
element. But
Canadian, so you're
yeah,
Canadian. You know, you know. Hey, Eva, have you ever been to Whistler? You've been to Whistler, right?
I haven't been to Whistler. I've been to Western Canada. In fact, I lived in Western Canada as a child, but not in Whistler. I visited. I can't even remember where it was now. It wasn't quite Whistler, but in the mountains. It was very beautiful.
Yeah.
But that was a
It's
number of years ago.
it's such a shame because I know Canada, if you take away the political problems Canada has, it's such a beautiful country to go traveling to. Personally, I would prefer to live in Canada more than America. I would. I still would. I went to Vancouver once in 2019 and it's beautiful. Whistler's beautiful. It's just such a shame what's happening, to Canada, isn't it?
Yeah, unfortunately, the nature is kind of the best thing about Canada at this point. I wouldn't want to live there. I actually hadn't been there. Am I still with you?
Yeah, you're still with me. Still
Okay, I
can
wasn't
keep
sure if
going.
it cut out. I hadn't been there for 4 years. I left in February 2020 to what I thought would be at most a one month trip outside of Canada, going to the UK and then onwards to Syria. And as it happened, I arrived in Syria just after I arrived. The borders closed because of all the COVID stuff, and
Yeah.
so I ended up spending 6 months in Syria in 2020. Now I'd already been to Syria starting in 2014. going every year, multiple times a year. So 2021 was the last time I was there. So that was 15 trips of varying lengths, sometimes for months. But in 2020, I got to spend 6 months there, which is amazing. But then the point being, I gave my apartment up in Canada because it was pointless to be paying rent, not knowing when I would get back, and at that point feeling definitely like I didn't want to go back. I'd already been feeling for years like I didn't want to live in Canada anymore for various reasons. So after that, I ended up in Serbia for a few months, and I made the move to Russia in 2021. And I didn't go back to Canada because their idiotic COVID policies.
It was
Number one,
ridiculous,
you
wasn't it?
had to have
It was
had
ridiculous.
the jab like Pfizer, or there might have been one other choice. I can't remember now, but I was not going to get any sort of needle. And actually, even if you had immunity, natural immunity or antibodies, Canada wasn't allowing people in if they didn't have the jab. So for that reason, I didn't go back. And then after what Russia calls a special military operation began in February 2022, I had already been to the Donbass in 2019.
Yeah.
But then I started going back there, and throughout 2022, I was there throughout much of that year. I would go for a few weeks, come back to my dogs for a few weeks, go, come back, etc. And as a consequence, so we might discuss this later on, but as a consequence, 2022 was a really hard year on the Donbass. Ukrainian shelling was intense.
Yeah.
And not only the shelling, but other war crimes like the use of these really insidious mines called nicknamed petal mines,
Mhm.
and many other things I can talk about. But over the course of 2022, I probably saw, well, not probably, I saw several dozen civilians, their
Mhm.
bodies torn apart in the streets from Ukrainian shelling of completely civilian areas. So because I was there and I was reporting on what I was seeing, I was doing my own videos, I was giving interviews, I was writing, uh, and European countries were cracking down on journalists from European countries that went to either the Donbass or Crimea. Germany was particularly hard on its citizens. And given how draconian Canada was becoming, and at the time, Chrystia Freeland, I'm proud of my Nazi grandfather, Chrystia Freeland, was deputy prime minister. And also in 2022, the main state media, CBC, had done a smear on me. I figured, I don't know if Canada will persecute journalists as Germany, for example, is. But I also didn't feel at that point that I wanted to risk going back and finding out. Like, I've been arrested by the Israelis before. I'm being arrested for a good purpose, for your convictions is one thing, but being arrested for some stupid government policy targeting journalists is not worth it. So I didn't go back to Canada after 2022 until finally last year. After 4 years away, I thought I really want to see my mom. She's older. I want to see my brothers. So at that point, I did decide to risk it. I also thought maybe the risk isn't as great as I feared. I don't know. But I thought I would regret if I did not go back and try to see my mom one more time. So I actually did go back. And so it's a very roundabout way of saying Canada has degraded so much in the 4 years I was away. It was noticeable even to me. And everybody I spoke to just talked about how corrupt the government is, how dilapidated the infrastructure is. And it's just so ironic because you hear, people brainwashed by whatever media they consume making snide comments about Russians and Russian infrastructure. And I was just thinking, like, you guys have no idea. Like, I walk to the train station from where I'm renting outside of Moscow City. So I'm not even in Moscow. I'm in the countryside. And in a 15-20 minute walk, I'm at a high-speed commuter train that is every 5 to 10 minutes throughout the day, or at worst, like every 10 minutes when it's not prime hours. And these are really nice trains and they're very inexpensive. Meanwhile, when I was traveling between Toronto, where one of my brothers is, and another city, about an hour and a half by car, the only ways you can get there if you don't have a car are to take a series of buses, or if you're lucky, there's like a few commuter trains a day, as far as I could see when I was looking, and they're not cheap. And so when I hear these comments about people disparaging Russia,
Mm.
even putting aside the propaganda from the Ukrainian side, but just from Westerners who think Russia is a backwards country where things don't work and everybody has only bathrooms outside and things like that. And then being in Toronto and seeing the main streets like Bloor Street and Young Street and how dilapidated and seedy and rundown they are, I just thought, like, people, you have no clue. And in fact, I overheard one young guy making a comment about ugly Russians, and I just said to him, "How do you know?" And he said, "What?" I said, "Well, how do you know what you just said? How do you know that about Russians? Have you met any? Have you been to Russia?" He said, "No." And he actually, I ran into him, or he came up to me a few days later and he apologized. And he said, "I'm sorry, it was just something I heard." So anyway, that's a roundabout ramble about the fact that, to your point about Canada, it's a beautiful country nature-wise, but it's really gotten,
Yeah.
even I was shocked by the prices when I was there, how high the prices were, and I read on X and other, forums, people complaining that they can't afford the basics, just to pay the rent and get groceries, so it's, here, things are very reasonably priced, and contrary to what the West claimed about the sanctions, it hasn't had a massive impact, as they'd hoped.
That was a very good, a very knowledgeable rant, Eva. Really knowledgeable. Um, Eva, so speaking of that, tell me, what got you into politics? What exactly got you into politics, and how exactly did you become a journalist? Give us the story there.
Um, so it was coming across the issue of Palestine for me, it was in the early 2000s when I ever actually heard anything about Palestine. And I blame that on my own ignorance, I'm the first to say, but also hugely on our education system in Canada and on the media, of course, and just on things we're taught to prioritize in the West. So I just had not heard of Palestine before, and I was not political. But when I came in the early 2000s, it was still the second Intifada, the second uprising, so what I came across was horrible news about Israeli violence against Palestinians. At the time, I did not realize this was the norm for them every single day, no matter where they live in occupied Palestine. And so I was shocked that you know, I was shocked by, I don't even remember how I came across it. I think listening to some news and seeing some videos, and I just was so appalled by seeing how people could, I was really naive, how people could be so inhumane to other people. And so I just started fixating on trying to learn more about Palestine, and eventually decided, well, I want to go there and see for myself. And that I finally went there to the West Bank in what month was that? May, I think, 2007. I spent 8 months there in 2007. I was an activist at the time. I wasn't a journalist. I always liked writing, but I had never done anything journalistic. But I started a blog and I started writing about what I was seeing, and all the different forms of oppression, from simply the mere dehumanizing oppression of having to wait at checkpoints to maybe get through or maybe not, which is the reality for Palestinians. Just various checkpoints, whether they're actual turnstile ones, or there are a couple of Israeli military jeeps blocking a road, or they're roadblocks, various forms of obstructing movement in the West Bank that make life hell for Palestinians. So I don't want to say it's the milder form of oppression, because people die at checkpoints if they need medical care and can't get through. But then I was also seeing things like Israeli invasions into Nablus, for example, or smaller towns around Nablus, and seeing the aftermath of that, seeing Palestinians' homes shot up by the Israeli army, hearing testimonies from parents whose children had been abducted by the Israeli army, seeing the invasion itself in a town that I was staying in, and seeing how terrifying it was, trying to imagine what's it like if you're in your home, you've done nothing wrong, you have children, and you know at any moment the Israeli army can blast through your door, shoot up your house, abduct or kill your children and yourself. And so that was obviously very impactful. And I spent also, over the course of several months, I stayed in a hamlet in the south of the West Bank called Susia, excuse me. It's south of Khalil, or Hebron in English, and it's an area where Palestinians had been forced out of their homes by the Israeli army, and their land had been declared a closed military zone. And so they were living in ramshackle, they still are actually ramshackle, not even tents, but just bits of plastic and iron, metal, and whatever they can construct to live in. And they face violence from the Israeli army and the illegal Jewish colonists all the time. They're beaten, their sheep are stolen or poisoned, their olive trees are cut down, their water is poisoned. You can find videos of this on X, either
Mm,
Palestinian activists or foreign activists that go there also and document the insane violence that these illegal, brutal, savage colonists do. And they're enabled completely by the Israeli army and police, often accompanied by them while they savage Palestinians. So I was seeing these kind of things throughout 8 months. So it was a lot to take in. And it's pretty life changing, because going from a relatively safe, sheltered upbringing to seeing how brutally people are being treated for no reason whatsoever, other than by virtue of being the original inhabitants of the land and being savaged by the occupiers. And so that was basically the start of me doing anything journalistic. I was still only blogging, and then eventually I started writing for free for different online publications, and then expanded from there. I mean, after 2007, I spent 3 years in Gaza. And so that was definitely for me uh, a school of life, kind of journalism school, because about a month and a half after I arrived by boat from Cyprus in November 2008. And then a month and a half later, the 2008 2009 3-week Israeli massacre of Gaza began. And there was, I don't remember, 5 or 6 or 7 activists there at the time. Israel, just as now, did not allow in foreign journalists. And back then, this is 2008, 2009, internet wasn't so great. You know, we didn't have it on our phones. You had to go, actually physically go somewhere that had a Wi-Fi connection to, blog or write articles or whatever. It was a lot harder to get information out. But that was my introduction into reporting from war zones, because it was everything you can imagine in terms of firepower, F-16s, Apaches, tanks, warships, drones. We didn't have the quadcopters back then that Palestinians are being terrorized with now. But nonetheless, for me, it was the most intense sort of introduction to doing any sort of journalism from war zones. I even hesitate to call it war zone, because it wasn't a war zone in the sense it was where people are living, and
yeah.
these completely civilian areas. They were being bombarded. Now it's infinitely worse, but these same things, these same crimes that we're seeing now, were being conducted by the Israeli army against Palestinian civilians back then. Point blank assassinations of civilians, including children, including infants, use of white phosphorus on civilian homes, burning people alive or greatly disfiguring them, attacking medics in their ambulances, which I was witness to in an ambulance that came under Israeli sniper fire during ceasefire hours, so-called, violating the ceasefire. All this stuff was happening, what is this now, 16 or so years ago when I was there. Plus, I have to say, the siege that is highly underplayed, it was enforced in around 2007, and it was so suffocating and brutal and savage. It prevented the Palestinians living in Gaza from doing the very basics of life. How could you live if you can't work, if you can't import, if you can't export, if you can't even go on your farmland without being shot at, which was the reality. So those are the kind of things I was seeing, still very much focused on Palestine when the war on Syria began. And whereas my focus was on Palestine, I started broadening my focus to understand this is all interrelated, and it's not just Israel, but it's Israel's founders and backers that are waging this war on the region. And obviously, the media is a huge part of this. They're the propaganda front for these bloody wars and occupations. So whereas when I first started writing journalistically, I thought maybe one day I'll get published in The Guardian. And it wasn't because I had an aspiration for a career as a Guardian journalist. I just thought that was a bigger platform. As it happened in 2013, I think it was 2013 I think it was 2013 when I wrote my first article for RT. And that was a pretty major platform at the time. And to their credit, they did not censor me what I was writing. So I was able to get information on Gaza out to what was for me a larger platform than anything I'd written for before. And then throughout the war on Syria as well, I was contributing to RT and other publications as well. So anyway, long-winded answer, but it's I think everybody has a starting point. I'm just glad that mine was not being indoctrinated at university by a so-called journalism course, which I'm sorry if I offend people, because there might be people that have come out of those courses and are actually not brainwashed yellow propaganda bots, but that's what they're designed to foster, is people who don't think critically, people who toe the government lines, people who are happy to use all these tropes about Russia or Syria or North Korea or Venezuela, that come straight from Washington or the UK.
Eva, who would you say was your favorite journalist to look up to? And what would you say was your favorite interview that you've ever done with someone, like your most favorite person that you've ever interviewed?
I think John Pilger was the most legendary journalist for me. And he was, he was very humble and very supportive of other journalists. And in fact, I mean, he was legendary as a journalist and a filmmaker. And his integrity and his principles were so high. So I respect him immensely. He also, like I said, he was supportive. I spoke with him a few times, and actually, he at one point asked me, what did he ask me? Did he ask me if I went to journalism school? And I said, no, thank God. And then I apologized. And he said, no need to, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, no need to apologize. The original journalist went to places, asked questions, witnessed things, observed things, and wrote about it. And, that was before the journalism schools. So for me, that was, it was, what's the word? I mean, that's how I approach things. So to hear John Pilger, this legend, say, yeah, that's the way it used to be before all this notion of journalism schools, it was, I guess, rewarding or something. My favorite interview, I mean, it's hard to say because I enjoy the interviews I've done with everyday people in Palestine or Syria or Venezuela. I have many interesting anecdotes from various places that I've reported from. And the thing is, at least in Palestine and Syria, now to some degree here, I can speak to some degree. I'm definitely far from being a good Russian speaker. I can comprehend better than a couple of years ago. My grammar is atrocious, but in Palestine and Syria, I got to a level of Arabic where I could speak colloquial Arabic with people, which is what people speak every day. They don't speak the standard Arabic unless it's their politicians or in the media. So I was able to converse one-on-one with people. So for me, it was very impactful to me to be able to do that, to understand better from them. What is it they want, they think, they need, they want to express. But in terms of maybe more notable people I've interviewed, I mean, you and I were chatting before we started recording, and I had the honor of interviewing Maria Zakharova in 2019. And that was a very, I was very honored to have that opportunity. I also, for me actually, and given that he passed recently, I want to say meeting and interviewing Kirill Vyshinsky was for me a very important interview, because this is a man of such great integrity. He was imprisoned by the Ukrainians. He was Ukrainian. He became a Russian. He was imprisoned in 2018 for over a year in pretrial detention, never brought to trial. He was accused of high treason for his alleged crime against Ukraine of publishing 4 years prior, in 2014, dozens of articles and viewpoints written by other people. I think he wrote like one article of all the dozens he published. And 4 years after the fact, Kiev decided he was such a danger to the state. Obviously, I'm being sarcastic, and accused him of state treason, that they abducted him and threw him in prison. And of the 14 or 15 articles they said were treasonous, he didn't write any of them. He merely was a publisher for RA Novosti. So this man, Kirill Vyshinsky, he endured very, very harsh conditions in Ukrainian pretrial detention. I had interviewed him by email. I'd interviewed his lawyer. And then when he was released in, I think it was August 2019, I was in Russia visiting here for my first time. And I was just so happy that he was released. And I remember asking somebody in the media that I knew, do you think it's possible I could meet with Kirill? I just want to say hello and congratulate him. And they said, well, his health isn't well. He's recuperating, which of course I understood. And I said, please pass my best on to him. And right before I left Russia, I was contacted, I think by that same friend, and said, Eva, do you want to interview Kirill? I said, yes. And so I met with him, and he was just such a kind, humble man. And he really didn't even speak much about his own suffering. He spoke about Ukrainian practices against journalists, targeting of journalists and civilians who speak out, but he really downplayed his own suffering. And I met him a number of times since then. After I moved to Russia, I would run into him at different events. And he always said hello, and he remembered who I was. He was so humble, but he was very well known by that point. Even I forget when his birthday was, but sometime earlier this year, I noticed on Telegram it's his birthday. So I sent him a message. This might seem very trivial. This is to make a point. I sent him a message wishing him well. He said, "Oh, thank you. And thank you so much for advocating for me back in 2018, 2019." And then he passed away some months ago, or some months after that. So some like a month or so ago. I had no idea he was ill. I believe it could be related to his ill treatment in Ukrainian detention. But so here's a man of such great integrity. He never made it about himself. He made it about the issues that he was defending, and that was freedom of speech and not supporting journalists who are being persecuted. And yet, even though he was apparently quite ill and had suffered a lot, he didn't make it about himself. So, in retrospect, having had that opportunity to interview him was pretty humbling for me.
That must have been a great honor, and I'm really sorry to hear that about him. You know, my regards, Eva. That was, I saw that tweet you sent of him, and that was really sad to hear he passed away. You know, that's pretty bad. Eva, so speaking of that, I also wanted to ask your trip in Syria. So when you were in Syria, what would you say is the great, like, what was your like highlights in your trip in Syria? And I also wanted to ask you another question with this one too. What happened? What do you think exactly happened to Assad? Do you think he was betrayed or not? So yeah, go.
Well, so I made many trips to Syria. I made 15 trips to Syria. Some of them for months at a time, some of them for just a couple of weeks at a time. But altogether, I spent about a year and a half, adding up all the different trips of the years. So 15 trips every year from 2014 to 2021. And I make that point because it gave me the chance to see Syria at various stages. So in 2014, when I went, it was very dangerous. At that point, I was only in Damascus. No, that's not true. I was in Damascus, Homs, Malula, and a few other places. So it was dangerous in the sense Damascus was being shelled all the time by terrorists in eastern Ghouta and outside of Damascus. And yet media, of course, weren't reporting that. In fact, BBC was there at that same time. And Lisa Say of BBC, and she misreported it. She said, well, the government claims, or sorry, she would have said the quote unquote regime claims it's the quote unquote rebels. I definitely do not use the term rebels to apply to these armed terrorists that were, whether they were FSA or Jaish al-Islam or what have you, they had the same savage, brutal mentality that we see now in Syria amongst the ruling power, Ahmed al-Shara, Mohammed al-Jilani. But at the time, people were telling me, like, we're being shelled all the time and the media isn't being honest about this. They were also telling me how much they supported Assad, and that's something they told me throughout my time in Syria. I can think of very few instances, and I know what the Western critique is. It's well, they're afraid for their lives, but that's nonsense because they could speak if they wanted to speak ill of Assad, they would have. And bearing in mind that I spent quite a lot of time in Lebanon in between trips to Syria, waiting for visas, and I encountered Syrians there. No matter where I went, I always ended up running into them, and they all told me, like, we only left because could be they needed work, could be the area was occupied by terrorists. But everyone I met, with a handful, with an exception of maybe a handful, and I met a lot of people, they supported Assad and they said he's not the problem. In any case, so that's 2014. 2016 was an important year to be there because of all the propaganda around Aleppo. And so I went to that city 4 times in 2016 and was able to directly counter the propaganda, like last doctor in Aleppo. And I found actually there's more than 4,000 doctors in Aleppo. I was also able to point out, like, hey, corporate media, hey, Guardian, hey, Channel 4 News, BBC, you're not reporting on the fact that 11,000 civilians have been killed by terrorists shelling and sniping. Civilians, not army, civilians. Just in Aleppo, it was another 10,000 in Damascus. So these are things, being obfuscated by the media deliberately because it didn't fit the narrative they were trying to push, which was a narrative that supported the overthrow of the legitimate Assad government. Then, if you fast forward to like 2018 and after the liberation of Eastern Ghouta, it started feeling for a period there that Syria was kind of coming alive again. I mean, the pulse of life was always remarkable in all my visits, but the fact that the shelling was lessened, but then the economic situation was worse. But there was some hope, but I have to be honest, I hadn't gone back since 2021, so I know the economic situation got a lot worse since then. So I guess in terms of like best, I can't remember, your question was my best experiences or memories, but
Like,
I mean, for example, in 2018, I went back to Malula. I'd been to Malula in June 2014, 2 months after it was liberated. So it was occupied for 8 months by FSA, al-Nusra, and other terrorists. And Malula is an ancient Christian Aramaic-speaking village, and it's one of the only places that still speaks Aramaic, or at least did. And so when I went back in 2016, and then again in 2018, and there I saw it was during in September. And it was during their Festival of the Cross, and it's one of the only places that still does this festival. And it's an ancient Christian tradition, and it was very moving to be there because this village, the terrorists had tried to destroy, steal, exterminate their history, and it's a very important village. So at that point, it felt like they fought off. That's the feeling I had, was that the terrorism had been fought off. The world threw its might at Syria, and Syria, with a few select allies, was able to fight it off. And so when Syria fell, to your question about Assad being betrayed, it was a shock because, we knew that the economic situation was terrible and that the Americans weren't going to lift the sanctions, and the sanctions were the prime reason for the terrible economy and the American theft of resources in Syria and occupation of Syria. But I didn't anticipate Assad's overthrow. Um, as to the treason question, or I think that was your question.
yeah,
I'm not going to be someone who says I know what happened, because nobody, frankly, does know what happened. And I think in time, I don't know what that time will be, that we'll learn more and more facts about the nature of the betrayal. I think it's fair to say that there were forces that compelled members, high-ranking members in the army and in the government, to betray Assad. That is my understanding, but I still say I don't know all the facts. So that's my understanding. I don't claim to have the full picture, and I really don't think anyone does.
yeah. Fair enough. That's a good answer. So, Eva, so let's say this: if I'm a Westerner coming up to you and I want to find out about the new regime, Durrani, right? That's his name, Durrani, like
Giuliani, yeah.
yeah, him. So, what do you say to Westerners who are saying like, "Oh, yeah, the Syrian rebels are so great, they're wonderful"? What do you say to them who are saying like, how would you lecture people about the new like Syrian regime that's in charge of Syria right now, like the facts that people should know about them and other truths that other people should know about them? Also, can you also mention too about also the crimes that this new regime have been doing, especially to the Christians in Syria and other Muslims? Go.
Yeah, so Giuliani, he's been rebranded as Ahmed Ashara, but he was literally a head of Al Qaeda. He was responsible for heinous crimes, and we're not only talking about like mere assassinations of people. We're talking about beheadings of people. The savagery of ISIS. This is what he was involved in,
Mhm.
and for people. And the thing I want to say about the rebels notion, because this is something that was pushed by Western media and a certain element of Western society that saw themselves as supporting a revolution against a so-called dictator. These so-called rebels, which these types of people would say were unarmed and they only picked up arms to defend themselves, that was utter nonsense. They were armed from the very beginning. And people tried to push the line, well, no, the Free Syrian Army wasn't like Al-Qaeda, it wasn't like ISIS. They were really, quote unquote, revolutionaries. No, they were armed from the beginning. They were committing the same heinous crimes from the beginning. They were responsible for massacres of civilians from the beginning, from 2011 onwards. And so this was a media trope that was supposed to make these seem like rebels that deserved support from the West, which they got immense amounts of financial and tangible support from the West in the Gulf and Turkey. So that was a lie that was propagated throughout the war. And now even in terms of like saying, well, Ahmed al-Shara, Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, the so-called president of Syria has reformed. It's nonsense. I mean, until some months ago, he was on a U.S. wanted poster. Rightly so. He was a
Mm.
terrorist, a wanted terrorist, and suddenly they just rebranded him. It doesn't whitewash his history of crimes against Syrian civilians. The persecution not only of Christians but definitely of Christians, of Shia, of Druze, of Sunnis as well, of Kurds, that started as soon as Jilani, Al Qaeda, Syria took power. It started right away. It's just it wasn't being reported. It started with persecution of people, minorities, and then we saw in and killing, not just insulting and forcing them out of their regions, but killing of minorities as well. And then in what was it, February, March, we saw the massacres that occurred not only on the coast, but the coast was the area where there were a lot of Alawites, but also in regions of Hama, and horrible slaughters. And we still don't know the numbers. I mean, at the time, media was saying hundreds, and of course, it was far, far more than hundreds. Then other sources that were credible were saying, no, it's almost certainly in the tens or 20,000s. Again, I haven't seen that this has been documented, but the thing is, it can't be documented because there's no way to do so. People were literally trying to run for their lives or trying to hiding in forests. When Julani's thugs came through villages, slaughtering everyone they could, including entire families. And then the West intervened to the extent they said, we want, it's like when they say to Israel, investigate your war crimes. They did the same thing. Well, he's going to investigate. He's going to investigate if crimes occurred. That means nothing. And then this continued down into the south, into Sueda, and the persecution of Druze there. And again, the same kind of thing, like, oh, well, no, this isn't him doing it. It's tribesmen doing it. It's not Jelani's forces. He's not
Oh,
responsible. He is responsible for it. Of course he is. So for the people who say, no, Syria's, um, yeah, Syria's much better now, now that Assad is gone. Well, take your wives, take your sisters, take your daughters and go and live there and see how well they're treated. I'm sorry to say that because actually they shouldn't, because their wives or their daughters or their sisters will most likely be kidnapped and raped and slaughtered. That's what they've been doing. They've been kidnapping young women, including women who are already married, and marrying them off multiple times, having them they're being raped, they're basically sold as sex slaves. This is the Syria you support. And even Sunnis who are not extremists, because Syria was a very secular country. And so you had different types of Sunnis. You had a minority. I mean, bearing in mind that many of the terrorists, if not the vast majority, that were fighting under the different terrorist bands in Syria were foreign terrorists. There were Syrians, of course, but many of them were foreign terrorists from dozens of countries. And so you did have in Syria, you did have Syrians who had sectarian mindsets, but they were by far the minority. I don't know what it is now, honestly. There's no way of telling. But there were also Sunnis that were against it. I remember meeting some Sunni sheikhs in Aleppo in 2016, and they were on terrorist kill lists because they didn't support the so-called revolution. They saw it for what it was, and they didn't use their mosques as breeding grounds for hatred. They refused to do so. They refused to have protests in and outside of their mosques. So because of the stances they took, they were put on kill lists by the different terrorist factions. I met them in 2016. And I've met many Sunnis throughout the years in Syria who never supported the revolution, never supported this sectarian, hateful mindset. In fact, I would be terribly remiss if I don't mention our beloved Mufti Hassoun. Um, Ahmed Badruddin Hassoun, he was the Grand Mufti of Syria. And he's been imprisoned by the terrorist, and he's clearly been beaten and tortured. His fate currently is not known. And this is a huge crime. Honestly, I know crime against humanity is a cliche term, but it really is a massive crime. This is a man of peace. This is a man who preached love. He never uttered sectarian words. He was always talking about Syrians coming back together. He forgave those who killed his own son. He forgave them right away. He said, just lay down your weapons and come back to Syria. And this man is being imprisoned and tortured by Julani's goons. So this is the Syria that Western journalists and influencers who flocked to Syria after Assad was overthrown. They flocked there, and a show was put on in New Year's, and it was like some sort of rave in Damascus. It was an absolutely ridiculous production, because anybody who knows the mindset of these terrorists knows that they do not allow music. They do not allow people to walk in the streets happily. They thrive on murder, on stealing, on oppression. And that's exactly what's happened in Syria. Plus, I forgot to mention the burning, the deliberate setting of fires of farmland, making lands uninhabitable or unworkable, unfarmable. And these farmlands that were burned were not only Alawites, but they were certainly in Alawite areas. So Julani's thugs have been doing what they can to create more actual sectarian divide in Syria, to divide people into sectarian lines and to push minorities out of Syria, if not kill them.
That was a really fantastic, I guess, explanation, Eva. Very knowledgeable. Eva, just want to talk about Palestine and Israel before we move on to Russia and the Greater Israel Project. Eva, like, I wonder, when you look at like what's going on in Palestine, the whole world's waking up, and it's horrific. This genocide is like horrible. It's got to stop. Like the videos. I mean, Eva, I heard about like I don't want to talk about it, it's a bit disgusting, but sorry, but it's like the crimes, there's even cannibalism now going that some like Zionists do. It's just disgusting what they do. Eva, and it just annoys me how humanity just is barely doing anything about it. I do think humanity is, but there could be more done. Eva, also right now, do you think like there's any way, like, how do you see the future of like the Middle East going? Do you think there's any way that Israel will fall and somehow Palestine will be liberated? Like somehow like good will trial over evil? Do you see like the Greater Israel Project failing and the Zionist state failing? Do you see that happening or no? This last question I want to ask about Syria is this issue. Go. And Palestine. Go.
Um, it's a hard question, because I don't think anyone can actually predict what is going to happen. I think let's see, a fairly I don't want to say safe, but I think it's fair to say that Israel's demise will come. Um, so my questions are, how much longer can Western, because Israel's propped up by the West and Israel's doing the bidding of the West. It's not only the fanatical genocidal regime in Israel, but it's completely backed by the West to commit this genocide, and it's been backed by the West to ethnically cleanse Palestine from the inception of Israel. But what my question is, how much longer can the West support Israel? For example, Western countries have been sending arms to Ukraine for so long, right? And probably have not depleted their best stocks of weaponry, but still they've sent quite a bit to Ukraine, money laundering, but nonetheless. So how much in terms of weaponry, and like if we look at Ukraine, Russia is able to manufacture munitions and everything it's needed to continue waging its special military operation, and what many call a war of attrition against Ukraine, sorry. But how much longer can Western countries send munitions to Ukraine and to Israel? And if we look at Iran's response to Israel after Israel illegally bombed Iran, Iran for about, was it 12 days, rained hell down on Israel. And we saw, I think many were surprised at how powerful the response was. I know many had been waiting for it, and many were overjoyed, frankly, at it. After seeing, as you've said, the horrors that we've been seeing. I mean, I've seen these horrors since my time in Gaza, but if we just speak of the genocide, the whole world's been seeing the horrors, and you have to be a monster not to be outraged and greatly pained by what we've been seeing. So when Iran responded with such a powerful response, hitting the very heart of Tel Aviv and really putting showing Israel that it could do a lot more, because it wasn't even using its state-of-the-art weaponry. I think that made people hopeful in the sense that, okay, we know that a very strong, powerful response is capable from Iran, and that Israel was incapable, in spite of all the lofty rhetoric about its air defense, it was incapable of shooting down Iranian missiles, a huge number of them. So I guess my hope is that it seems pragmatically the West won't be able to supply Israel or manufacture the arms needed to supply Israel indefinitely. How much longer? I don't know. I've heard people say it could be a matter of a year, could be more, could be less. I really don't know. I can't predict that. I wish it would be as soon as possible that Israel ceases to exist. And by that, I do not mean every Israeli should be killed. I do not endorse that. I'm saying Israel as a Zionist entity should cease to exist. And Palestinians have advocated for a one fair state for all, and I think that is the fairest thing. But at the end of the day, it's for Palestinians to decide. But how long Israel will continue, I don't know. So I'm sorry, it's kind of a roundabout answer because it's really difficult to say. Nobody, I don't think anyone can specifically say, but I think it seems the odds are in the favor that Israel won't be able to continue to exist as it is.
So speaking of that, Eva, I just speaking of that, I was just asking, so what has you been, so why did you choose to live in Russia over the West? And tell me some of your story of where you went to Eastern Ukraine and how like Russia treats those areas which Russia liberated now, like, you know, those cities in Eastern Ukraine. Go.
So I visited Russia in 2019, as I said, and my impressions, I spent 2 months here. My impressions were very good. I saw Crimea, I saw Moscow, St. Petersburg, and in 2019, during that visit, I also spent 3 weeks in the Donbass. So that was bearing in mind, people, this was a few years before Russia started the SMO. So for those who say unprovoked invasion, you really are deluded, or you need to do more reading and research, because in fact, many in Donbass had hoped that Russia would do something stronger against Ukraine. Basically, Donbass was fighting its own fight from 2014 until 2022. So when I moved here in 2021, the reason why, well, I saw how crazy the West in general, including Canada, had descended into COVID madness. But even before that, when I would return from, for example, Syria, when I would return from Gaza first and then from Syria, and I would hear people citing Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch or CBC or BBC and telling me things they knew about Syria. And I'm like, that's absolutely BS. Your information is incorrect. Like, because it was literally, it was just a lie emanating from Washington. And I got sick of it. And I got sick of people saying all these things about countries they didn't know about. I mean, not everybody in Canada is like that, but I was encountering it a lot. And it was just the combination of that and knowing that Canada and the US were supporting terrorism by Israel, by Ukraine, and advocating terrorism in Venezuela, in places I'd spent a lot of time in. I just got sick of being in any way a part of those countries. And various other aspects of the changing mindset, priorities, all the identity politics, for me, it was more important to be thinking about the impact of the sanctions on Syria, or the impact of the brutal siege on Gaza, or the US's meddling in Venezuela, or other places, so many other places than identity politics. So I got sick of it. And after having spent the time here in 2019, I just thought, like, well, I think Russia, like, it seems like a sane place to be. That was 2021. I'm glad I moved here. I wouldn't change things. I wouldn't have not moved here. I'm very happy here. I haven't actually seen that much of the country, but I did spend a lot of time in 2022 in the Donbass. And so I think another key point to mention is that after Russia started its SMO, its special military operation, in 2022, of course, we saw the predictable surge of Western propaganda accusing Russia of war crimes in Mariupol, in other places, all places I've spent considerable amounts of time in, and know the war propaganda not to be true. But also things like Russia abducting children, or Russia using these mines that I can't remember if I mentioned it to you before we were recording or not, but there are a very small mine called a pedal mine, and they were Soviet stock, but they were held by Ukraine, and Ukraine was obligated to destroy its stock of 6 million, and hasn't it. When I wrote about it in 2022, after Ukraine fired missiles containing hundreds of these mines, each missile contains hundreds, so I don't know how many missiles were fired. This was in mid-2022. And I saw them all over the streets in civilian areas of Donetsk. And actually, they were not only in Donetsk, but other cities and regions. And yet you'll see Human Rights Watch, or even this morning on X, I saw somebody tagged me on some Ukrainian propagandist accusing Russia of using the mines. And it's just like, it's very clear that it was Ukraine that used them. I mean, they were fired from an area. Basically, if you're a ballistics expert, which I am not, but those who are can determine based on the size of the shell, the point of impact, the nature of the shell, they can tell how far it has flown and from what direction based on the point of impact. So they know these shells came from Ukrainian controlled territories. And Ukraine has a stockpile of these mines. And who was impacted by the mines? Russian civilians, Russian soldiers, Russian rescuers, Russian sappers. As of now, it's like 184, 185 civilians have been maimed, 3 of whom died of their injuries just by these mines. And they're still every so often I'll read a new report about them, because they could be, an area can be deemed clear of the mines, and then if there's wind or rain, a mine can be dislodged off a tree or a roof or something, and an area that you think is safe is no longer safe, and there you go, your foot's gone. So that's kind of long-winded, but I wanted to say in 2022, as many might know, there were referendums held in the different oblasts. I was in Donetsk at the time, so I saw during the 5 days of the referendum there, I saw the massive will of people to participate in this referendum. Most people I spoke with said, we've been waiting 8 years for this. We want to join Russia. And that was when I went to Crimea in 2019, and then last year as well. That's what people said. We wanted to join Russia. When we lived under Ukraine, our lives were nothing. Nothing was developed. When Ukraine was thieving the money. And since we joined Russia, the roads have been built, infrastructure has been improved. And, so that's the kind of thing, even actually going back to Mariupol. So I was there when the fighting was still going on in Azovstal when was this? Early to mid-April, April anyway, 2022. Getting from Donetsk to Mariupol was very difficult because the main road was just blown to bits. So you had to take all sorts of detours under bridges. It was just a really hard, dangerous road. After Mariupol was liberated, in a matter of, I want to say just months, the roads were already repaved. Infrastructure was already improving. And I actually have a chronology of different videos I took throughout 2022 from April and then June and then other months showing, oh, look, new buildings, new buildings. So this whole narrative that Russia is occupying Mariupol and life is under occupation is ridiculous. In fact, one woman who I rented an apartment from, she said her friends who had left there and went to Europe, they were saying to her, oh, we think we want to come back, but not just yet. So they didn't want to come back because they have this anti-Putin sentiment, but they wanted to come back because they heard from their friends there that life is really good. So, yeah. What was your question again?
I think that was a perfect example. Well, it was about but I think that's a good example. I think you did a good response there. You did. It's true. Those areas that Russia now have liberated are very good. They're very well developed.
Yeah.
So one last thing, Eva, because it would be cool if I was able to talk to you for longer, like for 3 or 2 hours. But of course, you're a busy person, and that's understandable. Sorry, but it is what it is. But Eva, I was saying. So right now, Trump, Venezuela, and America are really Trump is it looks by the things. There's many rumors going on that he might do a military strike in Venezuela. Of course, it's all about overthrowing Venezuela for the oil and stuff like that. What's your thoughts on that? What's your thoughts on that, and especially what's happening there? Go.
Yeah, this is obviously something the U.S. before Trump and during Trump and now Trump too have been doing to Venezuela for a long time. They've been meddling in Venezuelan affairs for a long time. In 2019, around March, I believe it was, the U.S. orchestrated a series of power outages in Venezuela to try to instigate chaos. And I went there. At first, I was with a U.S. peace group for a few days, and then I just stayed on my own. And it was a really interesting time to be there because according to Western media, the streets were in chaos, people were rioting, blah, blah, blah. And actually what I saw was Venezuelans calmly dealing with what they called, and what I do believe was U.S. sabotage. But also at the time, if you recall back then, the West was trying to impose Juan Guaido as interim president of Venezuela, even though Maduro was the legitimate elected president. And actually, if you talk with people like Fiorella Isabel, for example, on elections, she's very much an elections expert.
I've
I'm
had her
not.
on my show. I've had her on my show. She's very knowledgeable. For had like back in
Yeah,
2023. Yeah, she's
but
very cool.
I remember in 2019. Now I don't remember the woman's name or her position, but she was a high up in the elections process, and the way she explained how elections were carried out, it was a very transparent process, and it seemed like there was very little. Again, not being an expert in that matter, I can't think of questions I should have asked her, but it seemed like there was very little you could fault in the process for. So he was legitimately elected. And yet the West was trying to say, well, no, Guaido's interim president and the people love him, and dictator Maduro, blah, blah, blah. Actually, I went to this massive demonstration in Caracas, and it went on for hours. And it was also so festive and so joyous too. And like youths, people singing and dancing. And that was another aspect on a side a tangent is when I spoke with Venezuelan youths, like teens, they know very well what they're fighting for. They're not just like some dumb teen that's been given $5 to go attend a protest, which is often the case that happens here, actually, if there's protest. But they actually could articulate what they stood for and articulate standing against US imperialism. And so I went to this demonstration, and then there was, at the time, they were saying there's going to be a massive pro-Guaido rally. So I got on a motorcycle taxi and I drove all over the city to all the different points, because I asked locals, like, where are they supposed to be? So I told the driver, go here, go here, here. And every place I went, like at one place, Altamira, I think it was, I saw maybe a dozen or 2 dozen people. Which is nothing. Another place, I saw a bunch of Maduro Chavista type supporters marching in the place where there was supposed to be an anti-Maduro march, and they were marching from there to join the main march. And it's like everywhere I went, I couldn't find the supposed big rallies for Guaido. So, and I also had the chance to spend time in poor communities in barrios, including one of the biggest ones. I went on a different friend's motorcycle, and we went up into the hills of this barrio, because the other aspect of the propaganda at that time was that due to the supposed chaos, there was no food. And so, like, you could obviously go into wealthy supermarkets in Caracas and see quite a bit of food. You can go into smaller supermarkets and see smaller varieties, but still ample food. You go to places and see food. But even in, if there was actually a crisis and people were out of food, you wouldn't expect to be able to go into the hills of the poorest barrio and still find signs for chicken and meat and cheese and vegetables, which is exactly what I saw. And I also went to a commune where a lot of what they produced, they were giving to the community to support the community. So there was just like a lot of very good social things going on, and awareness of and unity and awareness of the need to be to keep their history in mind, and of what they were fighting against and what they were supporting. And this was just so in counter to what the Western media was alleging. So now they've changed the script. Now it's not about, well, I'm sure they have a new puppet Guaido. I don't happen to know that person's name, but they're alleging fighting drug gangs, and it's absolutely ridiculous. It's just another pretext to try to interfere in Venezuela. What I don't know is Venezuela has been flexing back and showing they have the support of their people, and they're ready to fight. So it won't be easy for the U.S. if they're actually considering trying to go head to head with Venezuela. But bottom line is, it will be the people who suffer, again, on a fake pretext. It's always a fake pretext, whether it's to do with democracy or alleged chemical weapons or alleged human rights abuses. Meanwhile, the actual human rights abuses of the U.S. itself, or its allies, Israel, raping Palestinian prisoners to death, for example, shocking their genitals, torturing them, beating them, starving them. Ukraine also, Ukrainian sources, there are many, 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 many testimonies out of areas that are recently liberated, Ukrainian civilians saying the Ukrainian army raped our people, they killed our people. So these type of atrocities are being committed by the U.S. and its allies, and yet the U.S. puts on this fake moral cap and talks about human rights and policing the world. It's obviously beyond hypocritical.
Fair enough. So, Eva, before we finish up, what is the last thing you would like to say?
Oh, um, about what?
Yeah,
Well,
anything that comes to your mind, anything that comes to your mind.
I mean, for me, look, I obviously everybody wants the war to come to an end in Ukraine, but for me, the most important thing is Gaza. It's got Palestinians have no means of escaping. They're literally facing every unimaginable type of torture until death that they could face, and it's I think I'm definitely not alone in pulling my hair out, trying to think how to make this stop. So for me, the message is please keep Palestine in your mind. Keep in mind that the people are not numbers. They're people, individuals with stories, with families, with hopes, with dreams. And, I don't believe merely protesting is going to change a damn thing. I think we've seen direct action, whether from Yemen or from activists in the UK or wherever else against Israeli arms manufacturing facilities. Those are the types of things that actually have impact. So I'm not going to put out a call to direct action, but I'm just saying these are things that are more impactful than writing letters to Congress or protesting necessarily.
Well, that's true. Very, very well said, Eva. Thank you, Eva, for coming on. Before we finish up, where can people find you?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. So I am on X, although it's Eva K Bartlett on X. I spend more time on Telegram, and my Telegram is Eva Cream Bartlett or Reality Theories. And I'm not a blogger anymore at this point, but I do republish things on my blog, and that blog is ingazet@wordpress.com.
Thank you very much for coming on, Eva. It was a pleasure having you. And I just want to say, everyone, please go follow this girl on Twitter. Go check out her Odyssey account and all of the stuff she does. Fantastic journalist, one of the best going. She's done fantastic. She's done fantastic interviews of people and also doing a great job of interviews and fantastic. One of the best out there. Go check her out. Go give her a like and subscribe. And yeah, go check her out and go give her the support she deserves. Thank you for coming on, Eva. It was a pleasure to have you. God bless you all. It was a
Thank you
pleasure
so
having you,
much.
Eva.
Thank you
And
for
I
your
just
time.
and I just want to say to everyone, thank you for joining the Welsh Public Podcast, episode 170. Remember to like and subscribe this video and go share it around. And take care, everyone. Stay safe and free Palestine. Take care, everyone. Don't give up.